And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Assembly Call. It's not a victorious episode of the Assembly Call because this is a special midweek edition of the Assembly Call, and we are previewing the NCAA tournament. This is the third year now, I think we've done this. No, fourth year, because we did it back in 2013 as well, where we previewed the NCAA tournament. That was when we declared Syracuse as the team Indiana didn't want to match up against. Unfortunately, that proved true. Thanks, Ryan. But I'm your host, Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms, here with Ryan Phillips, and we have a special guest with us tonight, Ed Feng from the Power Rank, thepowerrank.com. What Andy is to bracketology, this is what Ed is to helping you win your March Madness bracket. He's got an incredible system, a really proven track record for helping people pick the NCAA tournament bracket. And so we brought Ed on because he's an awesome guy. He's a Michigan fan, so we can gloat about Max Bielfeldt, and so that he can help us all make better picks for our bracket. And we do want to remind everybody that we're having our bracket challenge this year. Go to assemblycall.com/bracket and enter. We're hosting it on ESPN. And whoever wins will get their choice of a piece of Assembly Call gear or a piece of Indiana gear. Whichever you want, it'll be up to you. So, with all that said, to begin, let's hop into the way that we always start these shows. We'll go around the horn, and I'm going to begin with my banner moment. And I know that, you know, some folks are disappointed at the 5 seed, looking at that draw with a potential matchup against Kentucky and North Carolina before the, by the time the Sweet 16 happens, and thinking Indiana got a raw deal. And perhaps they did, and we'll get into that. But this is the banner moment. This is the moment of every show where we talk about the reasons why we think Indiana can hang their next banner. And so I'm going to give you some right now because I want everybody to leave this segment believing in what the Hoosiers can do over these next 3 weeks. So here's one reason. There have been 10 Big Ten teams that have won NCAA championships. Half of those, of course, were Indiana teams. 8 of those teams were outright Big Ten champions. 1 split a championship, and 1 wasn't a Big Ten champion at all. That was the 1989 Michigan team, and Indiana won the Big Ten championship that year. But it does seem like one of the prerequisites, if a Big Ten team is going to do it, they're going to be the outright Big Ten champs, which Indiana was this year, and that's why I'm wearing this shirt. It just came in the mail today. I apologize if it's a little bit wrinkled, but that's the outright Big Ten championship shirt. The second reason to believe is that the last time Indiana was a 5 seed, what happened? The Hoosiers went all the way to the national championship, and no one was giving them a chance beforehand, looking at that number 1 seed in their region, a Duke team that was first in adjusted offense and first in adjusted defense in KenPom, and Indiana played them, and we know what happened in that game. And, of course, that bracket opened up some, which will happen. UNC Wilmington sprung an upset in their first-round game. Kent State, the 10 seed, made it to the Elite 8. And Indiana still was able to beat Duke, and they were able to beat Oklahoma. So they beat the good teams. They got a little bit of bracket luck, ended up in the championship game. Why couldn't that happen here? Believe. It's the NCAA tournament. Anything can happen, and this Indiana team is good enough to string together 4 or 5, maybe even 6 wins if a few things can fall their way, which sometimes they do. The next thing to remember is this. I know that game against North Carolina, potential game against North Carolina, looms large in the Sweet 16, and North Carolina will be favored. Well, Indiana has played North Carolina twice in the NCAA tournament, in 1981 and 1984. North Carolina was favored both times. Indiana won both times. In 81, Indiana was a 3 seed, North Carolina was a 2 seed, and of course in 1984, North Carolina was a 1 seed, the Hoosiers were a 4 seed, and that was the famous game when Dan Dockich guarded Michael Jordan, and we all know what happened there. And finally, another reason to believe in your Hoosiers is that we know that you need pro talent on your team to win a national championship, to make Final Fours. If you look back at the past Final Fours and the past national champions, they almost always have NBA talent on there, specifically first-round picks. Well, Indiana has that in Thomas Bryant, whether it's next year, whether it's 2017, and right now in Draft Express, he's projected as the number 16 pick in 2017. Not to mention a future pro in Yogi Ferrell, not to mention a potential pro in Troy Williams, and who knows where OG Anunoby's career is going to go, but that notion certainly doesn't seem crazy right now. So a lot of the boxes that you need to tick off to be a national champion, to make a Final Four, Indiana has them. So don't just look at that 5 seed and be disappointed. Don't look at a tough bracket and feel like the Hoosiers can't do it. This team can do it. They're the outright Big Ten champions. And the other thing to remember is that the committee may have given us a gift, a blessing in disguise, by allowing us to be outright Big Ten champions and play with a chip on our shoulder and be underdogs. And we know that Tom Crean teams have done well as underdogs in the past. Add it all up. And to me, hanging another banner doesn't seem so crazy. All right, Andy, let's go over to you, your bottoms line on Indiana's tournament draw and what we may see over the next few weeks.
Well, I assumed your banner moment would be the fact that Yogi got traded out for Pharrell, as we all learned yesterday on the selection show, but apparently that didn't make the cut for you, which is disappointing. I mean, I'll turn into to sour grapes bracketology guy here for a minute, and then when we get into the rest of the show, I'm happy to talk about other things. But just a couple comments on what the committee did, both in terms of IU and in terms of the overall bracket. I think first of all, and probably most important to the listeners of our show, is how the Big Ten was treated. I was pretty surprised at what the top 3 seeds or the top 3 teams got when you look at Michigan State, IU, and Purdue. I thought Michigan State deserved the 1 seed. I thought Oregon deserved one as well. I thought Virginia is the team I would have left out. They lost 4 games to teams that didn't make the tournament and really weren't in the at-large discussion. They had a losing record away from home, which I'll get to more on road record here in a minute. And I thought Michigan State really over the last month or so has been playing as well as anybody in the country. In IU's case, thought that the outright Big Ten championship would mean a little bit more, and I know that doesn't mean as much when you start looking at unbalanced schedules and things like that. But again, being able to win games on the road, winning at Iowa, winning at Michigan, which the committee clearly valued as a team, versus a team like Cal, who had a really poor record away from home. And then Purdue really acquitted themselves well, had every chance to win that Big Ten championship yesterday. Again, thought they would have deserved a better seed than Iowa State, who did have good wins, but a lot of opportunities to get those good wins. And what was odd to me about the Big Ten was it seemed to undervalue those teams and potentially overvalue the Wisconsins and Michigan States. So for a team like Monmouth that got left out, their bad losses continue to get cited, and yet Wisconsin had a trio of pretty ugly losses in the non-conference, and even losing to Northwestern early in Big Ten play, and it was like that didn't matter at all. And in Michigan, while they were the team, kind of the, I don't know, quote-unquote surprise team that I had the less of an issue with, they did go 4-12 against the top 100 teams, I believe. So you're winning 25% of those good games and not beating anybody else seemed a little bit odd to me, particularly given the margin of victory or margin of defeat, I guess, in a lot of those games that they lost. So kind of an odd year for the Big Ten. A couple other quick things probably fall in the hypocrisy category is road wins and road records. So Syracuse gets credit for winning at Duke. However, they're 3-8 or 3-9 in the rest of their road games. Vanderbilt did poorly on the road, and they still got in. So, and then the Virginia thing that I mentioned earlier. So it's hard to figure, at what point does that matter and what point does it not matter. Monmouth winning 17 games away from home, and that didn't really help them out. The bad loss thing I mentioned earlier, those are used against Monmouth, but Syracuse loses to St. John's, which I've heard multiple people say that if you lose to St. John's, you shouldn't be in the tournament this year, which is probably fair. Vanderbilt had its share of bad losses, things like that. Advanced metrics helped Wichita State, not St. Mary's. Again, not sure when that matters. And then just the overall kind of skew toward the major conference schools and the continued refrain of quality wins, quality wins, quality wins, and yet that just inherently punishes these mid-major schools like the Monmouths and St. Mary's and Valpo and all those guys, and it is what it is at this point. The tournament is still going to be exciting. I'm not going to boycott it because of who got picked, maybe because of the selection show, but not because of who got picked, and just I don't think it sends a great message to them of go out and be aggressive and schedule aggressively, which is what Monmouth did, and then they get penalized because they lose games in their league on the road. When Maryland somehow lost at Minnesota this year, if bad losses are that big of a deal, then it feels like it should matter a little bit more there. So definitely an interesting job by the committee. Probably a lot more things than that to talk about, but an interesting job. But we put all that behind us and get excited for the IU game on Thursday and the rest of the tournament, which I can't wait to get started tomorrow night.
By the way, speaking of the CBS broadcast, we invited Charles Barkley to join us tonight, but he couldn't open the Google Hangout, surprisingly, so couldn't make it. Ryan, your rant.
You've been thinking about that joke since yesterday, haven't you?
I haven't. It just came to me, I promise.
I mean, look, Indiana got screwed. I'm just so did Kentucky, and I don't ever feel bad for Kentucky, but Kentucky got screwed too. The fact that Duke is sitting there 4-5 against the top 25, they lost 4 of their last 7, 11-7 in the ACC, which was down this year, and somehow gets a 4 seed with 10 losses, just makes absolutely no sense. And we've got this year. It was top 50 wins, and God, when Calipari went on ESPN yesterday, when I find myself agreeing with John Calipari, there is something wrong with the universe. And Calipari sitting there saying, look, you've got to tell us what the criteria is beforehand. It can't change every year. And it seems like every year it does change. This year it's top 50 wins. 2 years ago it was, hey, did you play any true road games? Did you, get any road wins? The year before that it was straight up on the RPI. I mean, it's insane, and these guys need to come out and say right off the bat at the beginning of the year, okay, this is what we're going to look at. These are this is the criteria that we think is most important. Secondary, after that. It's always going to be subjective, but they've got to lay out some kind of formula that teams and schools can follow when they're scheduling, when they're doing stuff like that. Somebody was checking it out today that I was talking to and said that, look, you can't hold teams responsible for bad teams in their league. They have to play those teams. Had Michigan State played Rutgers twice. Had Michigan State not played Rutgers, they would have moved up 5 spots in the RPI. Just had those games not existed. They won both of those games. Had they not existed, they would have moved up 5 spots in the RPI. I mean, and then the committee is talking about how they're giving concessions to Syracuse because Jim Boeheim missed 9 games and all this stuff. Well, if you're going to give that concession, what about Wisconsin? Since Greg Gard took over, Wisconsin's playing way better than they were before. Are you going to discount the games they played with Bo Ryan as their head coach? What about Indiana? Indiana played like garbage before the calendar turned. All of a sudden, they're, since the calendar turned, they're 15-4 and look like a world beater. But, you can't give consideration to one school and one team and not another. I mean, so you should consider the entire resume, and that's it. There should be no caveats, no considerations, because, I mean, to be honest, if you're going to consider anything, Michigan State lost a couple games without Denzel Valentine, the National Player of the Year. They get him back. They look great. I mean, should we wipe those games clear? Obviously they didn't, because Michigan State's a 2 seed. So I think that whatever the process is, it needs to be clearer, and they need to come out publicly and state what they're going to do, what the main criteria is. Maybe do it over the summer. I don't know, like have a meeting and get together and decide, okay, these are the things that are going to be most important. And then, of course, from there, it's going to be subjective. It always will be, but at least those teams have a better idea of what teams are looking for, or what the committee is looking for, and what they need to accomplish on the way. I mean, if conference tournaments don't matter, then why do we even play them? I mean, Kentucky tied Texas A&M for exactly, Jerod. It's money. Kentucky tied Texas A&M. God, I hate that I'm defending Kentucky. Kentucky tied Texas A&M for the SEC title, then beat them in the tournament, and they wind up a lower seed than Texas A&M when their resumes are essentially close together. That game yesterday didn't even matter to the committee at all. And it makes absolutely no sense. And so Indiana has one of the toughest roads to get out of their bracket. As Jerod said, it's not impossible. It's definitely doable. But it is one of the toughest roads. You face arguably the most talented team in the tournament in Kentucky in the second round. If you get by Chattanooga, who I think is the best 12 seed. I mean,
Dude,
so
enough with the Kentucky
they just have
talk. Enough with the pro-Kentucky
such a
stuff.
tough road. I'm not pro-Kentucky. I hope Kentucky implodes and loses.
This is the worst part about what the
I'm
selection
just saying.
committee has done. Selection committee, you just made Ryan's rant almost entirely pro-Kentucky. So screw you.
Oh my God, I hate them for it. But no, I mean, so you play a good Kentucky team. Then if you win that, and that's like a huge win, you got to go play North Carolina, who's been one of the top teams in the country all season. So it's a tough road, but of course, it's the tournament. This team always plays well as an underdog. They get by Chattanooga. I have no problem seeing them winning those next 2 games. Not saying it's going to happen, but I could definitely see it happening. So, I think it's as Jerod said, there is optimism as an Indiana fan. It just sucks to be in this position, of course, always.
Yeah, we would have liked it to be a little bit better. Maybe they should just use the bracket matrix composite bracket as the actual bracket. I feel like people would be a lot happier if they did that. All right, now let's welcome in Ed Feng from the Power Rank. And first of all, Ed, congratulations on Michigan getting in. Obviously, Michigan We were at war on Friday, but we're all happy that you got in because I feel like as Big Ten fans, we kind of rally around each other come tournament time, hoping everybody does well. But what's your opening statement for tonight's show?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to thank you guys for having me on. It's going to be awesome, and I really appreciate it. I want to apologize to all the Hoosier fans for the committee's lack of imagination in seeding teams. We in Ann Arbor have a different view. We've watched this Michigan team fail to play defense all year. Neither by my numbers nor the games that I've watched do I necessarily think this Michigan team should be in. But 12 Big Ten wins seem to be a magic number for them. So we're on the opposite side there, but I apologize to you guys. I just want to pick up on one point that Ryan was saying. The committee's use of the RPI is the most aggravating thing for a quant like me. So RPI does not use margin of victory, and systems that use margin of victory are terrible predictors compared to systems that do use margin of victory. So for example, my stuff at the power rank is essentially margin of victory adjusted for strength of schedule. Ken Palm is efficiency adjusted for strength of schedule, and he breaks it down on offense and defense. And then a lot of the stuff you see on 538, Nate does a good job picking systems that use margin of victory. So my rant against the committee is this insistent use on RPI. It should be banned. It should be burned. No one should calculate it ever again. And so the last thing I want to mention, I've written a book about how to win your NCAA tournament pool. I'd love to offer a couple of just quick tidbits for those of you guys, in case any of you guys are in a pool.
Maybe.
My number one advice is don't get in a big pool. You're just so open up to the luck of others when you do that. So just maybe I could tell you a little story. I had a reader last year that used the advice in the book, the contrarian thinking, and picked Duke as a champ because of that, and won a pool of size 100, which is fantastic. It's a really big pool, and actually, honestly, the number I suggest not getting in a pool bigger than that. He also submitted the same bracket to a pool of size 1,500 and got 14th. So that's randomness at play. Your grandma picks some surprising upsets in the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and ends up beating you. So. And
when you said contrarian thinking, that would be like, don't pick Kansas and Michigan State this year because everybody's picking them. Go with somebody else so that you can actually have a chance of being one of the few that has that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's probably best to kind of use last year as an example because now we can rip on Kentucky.
Yes.
Everyone loved them as a favorite. Almost half the people on the 6 million brackets in ESPN picked them. I mean, they did have the best chance to win, but even if they win, now you and a whole bunch of other people have those same number of points. And what happens is someone tends to get lucky in the earlier rounds and get some shocking upsets even though they know nothing about college basketball. Maybe they're using mascots or colors to pick their bracket. But these types of things can happen when you have 500, 1,500 people in your pool. So get in a medium-sized pool. Well, if you really want to win, get in a small pool. But that's kind of unlikely. Get in a medium-sized pool. Use some contrarian thinking. And I talk about this in my book. It's as easy as looking at the numbers at ESPN and then comparing them with some win probabilities that you trust. I hope you would trust my own, but it's okay to go to Ken Palm. It's okay to go to 538. And look for a team that not a lot of people are picking, but that has a decent win probability.
Yeah.
And then just last, I want to mention, I know you guys are listeners of podcasts. I have an audiobook. It's 55 minutes, something that you can maybe consume in 1 or 2 commutes. Obviously, listen to this first because it's much more important and a much better show, but I do have an audiobook available for you. You can get that or the ebook at winpoolbook.com. That's all one word, winpoolbook.com.
Winpoolbook.com, cool, and we'll put that in the show notes too. Winpoolbook.com. All right, thanks, Ed, and we'll get back to some of those tips later when we start talking about picking the bracket. That is awesome. So, real quick before we move on and start kind of breaking down, because Andy, I know you watched a little bit of Chattanooga. I want to dig in a little bit to Indiana's part of the bracket. But you guys may have heard. I saw a few people tweet out that tickets to the Indiana-Kentucky part of the games on Thursday, the evening session in Des Moines, are just exorbitantly high. I think I saw $375 for nosebleed seats. So you all know that SeatGeek is our sponsor now. And so I actually went on SeatGeek to look at what the price of tickets were. And so for anybody who may still be thinking about going to Des Moines, don't be too freaked out by those ticket prices, because if you go to SeatGeek.com right now, there are actually 2 sets of tickets. One is 2 tickets for $181 each in section 209, which just looking at it here doesn't look terrible. And then you can get 4 tickets in section 304 for $236 each. And it's one of the cool things about SeatGeek is that you can see the tickets, see where they are, and then they actually have a deal rater. So those are amazing deals. There are other tickets that are just considered great deals, you know, 236 a piece, 246 a piece. And the other thing that you can do is you can enter your email address so that they'll alert you when ticket prices drop. So maybe you don't want to go to Des Moines, but you want to go up to Philadelphia for the regional. You can look at tickets there. Same thing for the Final Four. So go to SeatGeek. It's SeatGeek.com, or you can download their app. If you go to SeatGeek.com, there's a little button at the top that says, "How did you hear about us?" Enter the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY. Same thing if you do the app, and that way you'll get a $20 rebate on your first ticket purchase. So not only can you get tickets that are like half the price of what people are saying on Twitter that they are, you can also get $20 off those tickets, a $20 rebate as well. So SeatGeek.com, download the SeatGeek app, and use the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY. All right, so let's dig into Indiana's first-round game. And Ed, actually, I want to go with you to this first because you said something interesting before we started the show. We know that the 5-12 matchup, historically, that has been one where a lot of upsets have come. And it's kind of, you know, the old-fashioned wisdom. If you're going to pick a bracket right, you always got to make sure you have 1-12 beating a 5. And I think last year was the first time in a while that it actually hasn't happened. And from what you were saying earlier, it sounds like this year the 5-12 matchups seem to favor a lot of the 5 seeds, which obviously helps Indiana since Indiana is one of those 5 seeds.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look over a long enough time span, you know, more 5 seeds win that first round game. You know, the 5. If you look at the win probability for like 3, 4, 5, 6 seeds, it kind of goes linear. And what happened with this 5-12 thing is a bunch of upsets happened in a couple years, and then it becomes a cottage industry for people who need something to write about for this tournament to say, oh well, we got to do our 5-12 thing, and when in reality, there's really nothing to that when you dig into the numbers. And so my advice is always that don't pick a 12 seed just because they have a 12 next to them. You know, if you have a reason that you look for matchups, if you watched a lot of games and think the numbers are wrong because of maybe this team is young and is developed, that's fine. I can tell you personally that I don't have any of the 12 seeds close to even a 50-50 chance of beating a 5. I have Indiana at 88% to win that first round game. And I think you guys are good there. We can talk a little bit about Chattanooga and some of their I take stats like turnover rates and adjust for strength of schedule, so we can break that down a little bit too if you guys are interested in that. Yeah,
no, let's do that. I'm going to go to Andy real quick because, Andy, I know you watched a little bit of Chattanooga, and obviously you know a little bit about every team. So what's your quick scouting report on Chattanooga and what we're going to be seeing on Thursday night?
Yeah, so I watched some of their the Southern Conference Championship game when it was on, and I went back today to try to watch a little bit more of it, and I got to see a couple different segments before the stream crapped out that I was looking at. But you know, defensively, they force turnovers at a high rate, which, as I told you before the show, probably will leave IU fans who listen to this with, you know, sleepless nights. Maybe Ed can make us feel better about that here in a couple of minutes. But you know, when you look defensively, that's what they do really well. They switch defenses quite a bit. In the segments of the games that I watched, they played man. They played a 1-3-1, which I have to think we'll see at least some of, given IU's struggles when Michigan used it for a few possessions on Friday, and then they'll do a little full court press and trapping. So again, I think you see a little bit of everything that way. They don't have a ton of height, although they do have Toyo is the guy's last name. Justin Toyo was their conference's player of the year defensively. So he's a big guy, can block some shots, has a pretty high block rate. I think 20th in the country as I'm looking at KenPom right now. Don't have a lot of size other than him, but they do have, I think it was something that I read, Alex McCarthy, I believe, did a good interview with somebody who covers the Chattanooga team, and a lot of good information in there too. So I encourage everybody to go and read that. But talked about how they had a lot of guys that had length on the perimeter, and that definitely was apparent in watching some of their games. They really extend the defense and pressure, but also, you know, I saw East Tennessee State was able to get some open shots, and if you can avoid turning the ball over and avoid the pressure, their 2-point defense is really poor. It's 227th, so that's an area where IU has excelled. So if they can stay away from the shot blockers, stay away from the turnovers, feel like they'll be able to put up points. On the offensive side of things, they ran a lot of ball screen actions with Toyo in the part that I watched, at least. I have no doubt we'll see plenty of that, given again some of the struggles IU's had with that at the beginning of the season, and then a little bit again they're late. So I think we'll see a lot of that, and they really try to spread the court and set up isolation and really put pressure on guys defensively to either help on these pick and roll situations and things like that. So they really seem to spread people out. Shoot a decent percentage from three-point range, but not great. The other thing they do really well is get to the free throw line. Their free throw rate's just outside the top 50 in the country. So they draw a lot of fouls. I think part of that is just the way they isolate people and kind of spread them out and I guess draw attention, if you will, to whatever contact there is around the ball. Some of that's going to depend on how the game is called and how that works in the NCAA tournament, but that's something else to kind of watch out for in terms of them getting to the line. That's the place they've really excelled. Done well on the glass as well, although I think for the most part, that's something that IU hasn't had a lot of issue with. So I think the big things are, can they get Toyo in some foul trouble, and really limit the height Chattanooga has inside. Other than that, Chattanooga's pretty balanced. They've got a bunch of guys who play about 15 minutes a game. Everybody who plays at least 15 minutes a game averages at least 6 points a game, and nobody more than 12. So, balanced attack, not necessarily one guy to key on, but I think Toyo at least appears to be pretty central to what they do on both ends of the floor, and is, I guess if you had to pick one player to watch, that's the one that I would pick.
Let me throw another number at you. This is a team that shot 36% from three-point range for the season, but when they sprung their big victories, and they did beat Georgia at Georgia, they beat Illinois in it was a semi-away game, so I don't know where that one was played. And then they also won at Dayton. So 3 big victories. They shot 40% or better from three-point range in all of those games. And the 2 guys that you have to watch for, Eric Robinson off the bench, he's kind of like, he profiles a little like Nick Zeisloft, where he only uses 14% of possessions, but he shoots 40% from downtown and seems to be kind of their emotional leader based on what I've read. And then also Greg Pryor. And then when they played Iowa State, which is the team most similar to Indiana that they've played, they only shot 20% from downtown and they lost by 20. So clearly, in that small sample size of games against big conference teams, when they shot well, they were in it. When they didn't shoot well, they weren't. For the season, Indiana wasn't great at defending the three-point line, 154, 34.3%. So Indiana want to make sure they don't let Chattanooga get off and start making threes, get comfortable behind the line, because that has been their formula for beating big conference teams this year. And Ed, we've said some things here, may sound a little bit scary, but you said you have Indiana with an 88% chance of winning.
Yeah, absolutely, and just the numbers support a lot of what Andy's saying. When I look at 4 factors and I adjust for strength of schedule, I see that they're good at forcing turnovers. They're actually 27th in the nation when I adjust for strength of schedule. The only thing, a number that I see that kind of goes against what Andy was saying, was when I adjust free throw rate for strength of schedule, they come close to Division I average. I have them 142nd. So that suggests that they might not be able to get to the line against the big Indiana team.
Very nice. Very nice. And look, Indiana has been in foul trouble lately, and some of that we've blamed on officials, but some of it is, especially with Robert Johnson out and a little bit of a shorter bench, Indiana has just seems to have been fouling a bit more lately. And so you're going to want to, obviously, especially if guys aren't healthy and it's a bit of a shorter bench, Indiana needs to be careful against a team that, whether they're average or a little bit better than average. That's one of those things in a one-game scenario, a single elimination, that can get you in trouble if you get in early foul trouble, so the Hoosiers need to be careful there. Now, here's the other thing that could get Indiana into trouble, and that would be looking ahead to this game against Kentucky, because as soon as the bracket came out, that's all everybody has been talking about. And Ryan, I want to ask you about this, because my theory on this is that Indiana has been really good this season at refocusing after a loss, and obviously they lost to Michigan. And so I have faith in the Hoosiers' ability to refocus, come out, and really play with a sense of urgency, because that's what they've done all year after they've lost games. The other thing is, I really feel like the attention on the Kentucky game, the IU-Kentucky game, is going to be a lot more from the fans than it is the players. Because, number one, none of these players were around in 2011, 2012, when Indiana and Kentucky last played, and only 2 of the guys in the rotation, Yogi and Colin Hartman, are from Indiana and would really understand what all this Indiana-Kentucky hubbub is about. So obviously they know Kentucky is a big team, one of the biggest brands in college basketball, and you just have the natural look ahead to that. But I don't fear it, as I might have, like in 2012 when Indiana might have played Kentucky, coming on the heels of the big victory earlier. What do you think? Do you think that's a big fear for this team? Are you worried about it? Because obviously, if they do look ahead, this Chattanooga team is good enough to beat them.
No, I don't think they will be looking ahead. I think just reading the comments after the draw was announced, I mean, Yogi and some other guys were saying, man, this is a really good team we got. And Tom Crean seemed to echo that as well. I mean, Chattanooga was 15-3 in their conference. You go 15-3 in your conference, you're good. I don't care who you are, what your conference is. I mean, that's a good record. You're playing teams that know you and know what you do, and you're beating them consistently. And Indiana did that in the Big Ten, and so they will certainly have that level of respect for Chattanooga. This isn't a team that slipped in. This was a team that really deserved and earned their spot in the tournament. So I think that Indiana is going to be focused. And what I think they need to do against Chattanooga is do what they've done when they've been successful this year. Indiana is the more talented team. And if Indiana, even though Chattanooga wants to play at a fast pace like Indiana is comfortable with that, Indiana's better at it. And what Indiana needs to do is go through the paint. That has been what has made them successful this year. Whether it's driving or throwing it down to Thomas Bryant or Max Bielfeldt, play through the paint and work out from there as opposed to shooting threes first and hoping to get some points on the interior as well. Yogi Ferrell needs to drive the ball. He needs to get it to Troy Williams, who needs to drive the ball. Robert Johnson needs to be in there looking for gaps. Hopefully he's back and healthy. I mean, they seem to think he will be, but he needs to be turning that corner. When he drives from the wing to the top, he needs to be turning that corner, getting in there, finding Thomas Bryant for easy buckets. That's going to be the key, is beating this team on the inside, because anybody can have a good shooting night, and you cannot plan on that. What you can plan on is beating a team to death on the interior, and that's what Indiana needs to do. And on top of all that, they need to rebound. And that has not been a problem this year. So knock on wood that stays, consistent, that they continue to rebound well. As you said, they have a size advantage. They need to beat this team on the inside, both ends of the floor, and stay out of foul trouble. And if Thomas Bryant can stay on the floor, Max Bielfeldt can stay on the floor, I'm confident they will win this game, and I'm confident that they will move on to face Kentucky.
Yeah, and if Indiana wins, they're likely face Kentucky. Now, before we assume that, real quick, Ed, let me ask you this first. I mean, that Stony Brook team that they're playing, it's their first time in the tournament. They've got a really, really good player, and sometimes when you get one really good player, he's the kind of guy who can help you spring an upset. What kind of chances do you give Stony Brook of upsetting Kentucky in the first round?
None. 9%.
Okay.
I mean, this Kentucky team's interesting. We can talk a little bit more about them later, but Calipari's teams are young. They're different from November than they are now. I've actually done some analysis of how they tend to outperform the markets in the tournament, and they do. And I think a lot of that is kind of the youth. So no, I'm pretty confident we'll see an Indiana Kentucky game. I know you guys can't look ahead like that. I know that's not kosher fan base.
No, it is. I mean, we're not players. We're fans, so we can look ahead all we want. The players and the coaches can't look ahead. So, okay, so let's assume that it happens then. I mean, kind of briefly, we don't want to spend too much time on it because if Indiana beats Chattanooga, we can spend a lot of time previewing that game in the post-game show. But what's kind of your gut feeling, Ed, and then you too, Andy, on what that game will be like, that Indiana-Kentucky game?
Yeah, no, I think it'll be a good game. Maybe I can just give my perspective on Indiana just as an outsider.
Yeah, sure.
I find this team is very dangerous on offense. We obviously saw, what was it, like 169-0 run that you had at Ann Arbor?
Felt like
Chrysler. It. And, just watching, Michigan struggles on defense, but just watching the ball movement that Indiana had and just the threat of the three-point shooters that you guys have is scary. And Kentucky is not as good a defensive team as they were last year. So I think that matchup suits you really well. Kentucky is good on offense, but Indiana has been a lot better on defense than they were a year ago. And in fact, I've been trying to tell the Michigan fan base that, as terrible as Michigan is on defense this year, look at what Indiana did from last season to this season on defense, and that there is hope for next year. And, no one's listening to me, but I will continue to try to instill hope. But yeah, defensively Indiana has been much better, and I think you guys have every right to be optimistic about your chances to get through those, what's looking like Kentucky and North Carolina.
Indiana, a shining example of defensive hope. I don't know if that's saying something really good about Indiana or saying something about how bad Michigan's defense has been, but we appreciate that. Andy, what do you think about that IU-Kentucky game?
Yeah, I think I tweeted this last night, but that's where Robert Johnson becomes really important. We talked a lot after the Michigan loss in the Big Ten tournament about it. It felt like a game where they missed him even though I think there were other games prior to that that they seemed like they would, thought they would, really missed his presence in that game. And I think the Kentucky game is one where they have to have him with Ulis and Murray in the backcourt. Yogi can only guard one of those guys, and they're both. They're combining to score probably 40-plus points a game, so you got to find a way to limit those guys. On the flip side, as Ed said, Kentucky hasn't been as good defensively. Well, they are, rated number 1 on the Ken Pom ratings for offense. Defensively, they're around 70th. They've struggled with allowing defensive rebounds. Their big guys have gotten, beaten up inside a bit. They do have plenty of size, and they've got some experience down there, but they've definitely an area that they've struggled. And Texas A&M yesterday got a lot of second-chance opportunities. Couldn't convert in a number of cases, but really, did a good job on the glass. And Kentucky's defensive free throw rate is pretty ugly as well. So definitely think IU could score on them, but I think Robert Johnson becomes really critical to that. But can guys like Bryant and Anunoby and Juwan Morgan and Troy Williams give them trouble on the glass? I think they absolutely can, and that would obviously be really important. But I think the big thing for me is defensively, how do you slow down those guards? You're not going to stop them entirely, but how do you slow them down enough? And I think Robert Johnson becomes a pretty big part of that. So if there's anything good to come out of losing the Michigan game, as we talked about before, is that it gives these guys a little bit of time to rest. Seems like they've been really cautious with Robert coming back, and presumably an extra close to a week of rest and treatment and things like that. He'll be ready to go on Thursday.
Hey, just kind of a random question for you. Is it at all possible that Indiana was docked a seed because of injuries? I mean, doesn't the committee take that into account if you're kind of banged up and not having Johnson in there with Hartman getting hurt in that last game, Morgan? Is that at all possible?
I don't think so, because to me at that point there's nothing really definitive out there. So in the case of like a James Blackman, you can take that into account because you know what's the kind of final roster is going to look like. In this case, you're really doing nothing more than speculating, and there was even a couple years ago that BYU got in even though Kyle Collinsworth blew out his knee in the WCC final, and you knew that in theory there's no way they're a tournament team without him. But they didn't really dock him for that, which I know is kind of a slippery slope in that case. But no, I don't think that had anything to do with it, because none of those injuries, at least to anything that's been released, can be perceived to be anything serious at this stage. If it was more serious where someone might not actually be there, so think like Kenyon Martin in Cincinnati back in the early 2000s, I think it was, that was a case where you knew he was going to be out. They got docked only 1 seed line, and again, that was a case where you knew they weren't going to be anywhere near the same team. So I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think it was committee just hating the Big Ten, essentially.
Yeah, that seems about right. And Ryan, your quick thoughts on IU Kentucky, and obviously how important it is for IU to be at or near full strength by the time that game rolls around.
Well, yeah, obviously, I think that Andy's right. I think Robert Johnson becomes really important in that game. I mean, forget, Ulis and Murray are maybe the best backcourt tandem in the nation right now with the way they're playing. You add in Isaiah Briscoe, who's had a really nice season at times, and it becomes a daunting challenge. I think that a guy like OG Anunoby will probably have to go 20 minutes in that game minimum guard, and most of that will be on Jamal Murray because of his length. He can frustrate Murray as a shooter. I mean, Murray's shooting 42% from three-point range. He's a versatile player. He's going to be a top probably 5'10" draft pick. He's a very, very good player. I think that this will be the first time that Yogi is guarding another point guard in Ulis, who's actually shorter than him. So that'll be an interesting matchup that I think people are looking forward to. It's 2 great point guards who may not have NBA careers, as far as like long-term NBA careers, but they're universally recognized as 2 of the top 4 or 5 point guards in the nation.
He doesn't mean it, Doc. He doesn't mean it. He's
just
kidding.
No, I'm saying it's. Look, I love Doc. I love Yogi. You know that. I'm saying they're not predicted to have that.
Right.
Of course, Yogi would run my second unit on an NBA team tomorrow. I love the guy. But I think that it's an interesting matchup because they're really what has separated Kentucky the last few years when they've been good has been their interior presence, and this year they're very much a guard-heavy team. They do have interior guys. They've got what's his name, Marcus Lee down there, who's a veteran. They've got a few guys who can really bang in the post, but it's more of a hefty guard, heavy lineup, and those guys are doing the heavy lifting for them. So I think it'll be an interesting matchup, especially with IU's shooting ability. I don't know how they're going to shoot in Des Moines. Either team, that it's always a foreign arena is always a strange place to shoot. You never know how that's going to turn out. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully, we see some guys playing up to their ability, and hopefully IU can clamp down on the turnovers and not get into foul trouble. They're out of the Big Ten now, so hopefully we don't have to worry about the officiating being atrocious. But yeah, I think that Indiana and Kentucky. Somebody earlier today said they thought it would be one of the best games of the tournament if it eventually happens, and I agree with that. I think that both teams will have huge crowds there. And both teams, I think they're fairly evenly matched. I think Kentucky is an incredibly talented roster, as they are every year because of the NBA, the one-and-done rule. But at the same time, Indiana is really talented too, and this is a team that has really peaked and played very well in big games this year. So I have in my bracket, I have Indiana picked to beat Kentucky.
Well, we wouldn't have let you on the show if you didn't, so that was a good choice.
I would have been run out on a rail next time I'm in Bloomington, so I kind of had to, yeah.
So, real quick, I sent out a poll for how far IU fans think the Hoosiers will go. We're going to get to that in a second. Plus, I have a big upset pick that I want to share with everybody, and we want to talk about how far we think all the Big Ten teams will go. Ed, I want to bring you back on here real quick. Because this is usually the point in the show where we give our call to action to our email list, but I figure most people are on the email list by now. Will you give folks the URL again for how they can get the audiobook and your book? Because obviously with brackets having to be filled in the next couple of days, it's important that people get on that now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get my book and audiobook at winpoolbook.com.
Winpoolbook.com.
Yeah, it's all one word, winpoolbook.com.
And people can get on your email list at thepowerrank.com, right?
Yep. And if you get on my email list, I'll give you I'm offer some of my bracket advice, and that goes out Wednesday.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it. I'm on that email list, and I very much enjoy it.
Excellent, thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, so let's get some kind of bracket analysis here ready. I do want to let you know I sent out this tweet. The tweet said, "How far do you have Indiana going in your bracket?" The options were first round, round of 32, Sweet 16, or beyond. Because Twitter only gives you 4 choices. And so far we have 355 votes, which isn't bad since I just put it out about 30 minutes ago. Only 6% of people think the Hoosiers will lose their first-round game, so that's good. 21% think the Hoosiers will lose in the round of 32. 39% say the Hoosiers make it to the Sweet 16, and 34% say beyond, which is awesome. I love you Hoosier fans that you're excited, that you're optimistic, that you're hopeful. I am among those people who put beyond. I have the Hoosiers going all the way to the Final Four. This is not my homerism. I just think I like the matchups. I've just thought that this team was going to peak at the right time. And so let's before we give our Final Four picks, so let's talk about how we think the other Big Ten teams will do. And Andy, bring you in to talk with you about this first. I mean, obviously, Purdue seeded a little lower than people think. Michigan State seeded a little bit lower than people think. Do you think that the Big Ten teams will outperform their seeds and have a good performance here in the tournament?
I think it's probably a mixed bag. I think Michigan State, really like the way they're playing. The potential Virginia matchup for third straight year in the tournament and the Elite Eight is one that I think would be really good. And it'd be interesting to kind of get Ed's thoughts on this, because I know in kind of reading through the book and talking about teams who may have a fairly high win percentage compared to people who are going to pick them, it feels like Virginia probably falls in that category based on the percentages I looked at. So he could jump in on that. But I think Michigan State definitely has a Final Four caliber team, a national championship caliber team if they're there. So I think they could definitely outperform that to the extent that they'll, you can outperform a 2 seed. I think, Purdue's interesting. That first game against Little Rock is one that I think will be really interesting. Little Rock is a team that, when I was looking at the potential 12 seeds, I think I had them as 11, but they were, one of the ones that, I was kind of hoping IU wouldn't see. The way they play defense, they play kind of like a pack line defense, might try to take away some of Purdue's big guys and size advantage inside. But I think if Purdue gets past that, they could have a decent run. We've now said good things about Purdue and Kentucky on this show, so we're probably just going to have to burn this thing down.
I'm deleting it. I'm not posting this to the podcast.
Just edit it into silence or play the fight song in just large sections in the middle of the show just for fun. Iowa, I think they've struggled too much down the stretch. Maybe they win their first round game, but I don't think they do very much. Wisconsin, I think they can beat Pitt because I think they're pretty overrated. Might be able to give Xavier a good game, but I do think Xavier's a pretty good team, so I don't see them getting out of the first weekend. And Maryland's kind of the wild card to me. It feels like all year everybody's been waiting for them to put it together, and it kind of feels like 30 games in, they are what they are at this point, and that's probably not going to happen. But they're also a team that I could see them losing to South Dakota State in the first round, and I could see them getting on a little bit of a run if they finally figure things out. But they're kind of the wild card for me. I think in terms of teams, with the potential to outproduce their seed, I think Michigan State, IU, and Purdue probably the ones that have the best chance of that based on who's there. I do think Michigan will beat Tulsa, but I'm not sure they get out of that first weekend either in Brooklyn. So I think the three that have the chance to go the best are the three that were seeded the highest, and I guess that probably makes sense.
Ed, what do you think about the Big Ten teams?
Yeah, absolutely. The Michigan State Virginia thing is really interesting. I have Virginia having a higher probability, and I do think they are a very good contrarian choice. But I think my numbers don't capture everything about Michigan State. There were those games that Denzel Valentine missed when they lost to Iowa twice. There's an Izzo effect in the tournament, so he's another person that tends to outperform my pre-tournament numbers. Actually, not as much as some other coaches, but so when you look at my win probability, I have.
Wait, who are those other coaches? That's intriguing.
Well, why don't you guys take a guess?
Calipari.
Yep.
Yep, we're definitely burning this episode.
Was Bo Ryan one of them?
No. I actually didn't run him. I didn't run his numbers this year, but I ran him last year, and it was very close to Bo Ryan. And actually, I'll eliminate one for you guys, Krzyzewski.
Ryan's favorite.
He outperforms his projections? Wow.
No, neither of them do. Neither of them outperformed my pre-tourney numbers.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. I was going to say, they're always seeded high, and they always seem to tank unless they win the national title.
Right, exactly. I was looking at it. They've won 2 titles in the last decade, and they've gone down in the first round 3 times. That's about as much variance as you can get in your tournament performance. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's one person. I'll give you another one. Patino actually did better than Izzo, but he doesn't matter.
Yeah.
On stripper probation.
Yeah.
What about Boeheim?
No, I should have run the numbers on him. They weren't high enough. They weren't high enough ranked for me to run the numbers.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, It's just because a couple times he's made the Final Four as like a 4 seed or.
Right.
No, I don't know who the other one would be. What?
So the one, and remember, this is data from 2002 to 2014. The top one was Roy Williams.
Wow, really?
So almost 4 points higher than my numbers expected, and still a significant amount more than the markets expected. And the markets are actually, more dynamic than my pre-tourney numbers, right? Because they can react to the more recent games.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because he's been a guy who they seem to always at least make the Sweet 16, sometimes the Elite Eight, even when it's not his. But when he's the 1 seed, it's almost like they win a title or they get to the Final Four. So he usually lives up to expectations there. But yeah, a few times they've come in a little lower and made runs. So.
Yeah, and the thing I'd like to do is run this back further, because I just talked to a UNC fan that reminded me about how disappointing Kansas was when Roy Williams was the coach there. Yeah. And so this is clearly a small sample size. We're looking at 40, 50 games, and you kind of have to use some advanced methods to make certain that you can be statistically certain that these coaches are doing better. But that's the best I can do, I guess. That article.
Do we want to ask you where Tom Crean falls in there?
I was looking. I swear I ran his numbers. I'll try to do that. I'll get back to you when I get a little break here. I'll try to go back and run that.
Okay. So we got you off track. So the Big Ten. Your quick hit thoughts just on how we think all the Big Ten teams will do.
Oh, that's right. Izzo effect. So the last thing I wanted to mention about Michigan State is that the markets actually have them flipped. So they have a higher chance of Michigan State winning the championship than Virginia. And one of the things to know about predictions is the best idea is to kind of combine a number of different predictions. We call these kind of ensemble predictions. I do this in college football. So probably, I think, I'll run an ensemble later, but I think Michigan State and Virginia are very close. Michigan, I think they win that first game, and I don't see them, unless they start hitting more than half of their 3-point shots, I don't see them really going much further beyond that. I like Indiana's chances, like I said. I like the way that your offense goes and the way that you can shoot threes, and another team that's getting hot, that can get hot and make a very far run. And what teams am I missing?
Did you talk about Maryland yet? Did I miss that?
Oh, Maryland. Now that's a fascinating team to me, because I've seen them play. I don't think they're as good as the sum of their parts. So I think there's more talent than what we see the performance on the court. And, it's just a high variance team, right? Exactly what Andy was saying, like they could lose in the first round, or they could make the Final Four in a region that's relatively weak, except for Kansas.
Yeah. What about Jeff in our chat has a good point. What about Shaka Smart? Where does he fall on that list of coaches that over or underperform?
All right, well, I'm gonna go run some numbers now. Can you give me a couple minutes, and I'll have an answer for you guys.
We'll open up the floor to Ryan. He takes at least a few minutes every time, so that'll give you time to go.
Yeah, I'm the loquacious one, Jerod. Come on now.
All right, so what do you think about the Big Ten teams?
I think that Maryland is a team that's interesting because we all know they have Final Four talent. As Ed said, they're not they're not equal to some of their parts. I think that Purdue. Here's what drags Purdue down in my estimation. A.J. Hammond's body language is terrible, and when he's your main source of presence on the court, I mean their guard play really isn't that good. They've had some good shooting nights recently, but their guard play really isn't that good. They win with their size, and when A.J. Hammond is your lead guy, and you're in the Big Ten tournament title game, and in the last play he's not running the floor. I mean, that drove me absolutely nuts, and I was rooting against Purdue. I mean, and if he runs the floor there, Matt Costello doesn't get that block. If he does get that block, Hammonds is there for the putback, and it's an easy two. I mean, it just drove me nuts, and so I can't put faith in a team that is led by a guy like that. I just can't, and that has been Hammond's entire career. So if he's the guy you're hanging your hat on, I cannot get behind you. As for Michigan, I think Michigan wins their opener. I'm not sure how far they go. Look, Notre Dame is beatable. I think Michigan could beat Notre Dame if they win that first opening game. But then again, Notre Dame could win there and take out, and go through and take out West Virginia. I mean, they're a team that's been up and down. If Demetrius Jackson shoots the ball well, changes the entire complexion of things for Notre Dame. But yeah, I think that the Big Ten will outperform where it's been placed. I'm just not sure that it's going to be Maryland going to the Final Four or anything like that. I think Michigan State is going to play like a 1 seed, and I think they are going to make the Final Four. They're my pick to win the whole thing. I know we'll get there later, but I mean they've been my pick to win the whole thing for about a month now. So I just think that's the best team in the country. I don't think there's any question about it, and they're playing like it right now. So yeah, I think the Big Ten will make some noise, but I don't think that other than Michigan State, I don't think there's a championship contender there. Obviously, the teams all have talent enough to win a championship, but it's just about the situation, the draw. I mean, you got to get. We said this before on this show, but you got to get really lucky to win a national title. You got to have a lot of things fall your way. You're playing a lot of games in a short amount of time. You got to stay healthy. You got to get a good draw. You got to get placed in a good region. All this stuff. So I think that right now the Big Ten looks like a very good conference that got kind of screwed on their seeding and will, I think, show well, but really has one national title contender.
All right, so Ryan, let's talk Final Fours real quick then. Who do you have making it to Houston? You're muted.
Sorry. Right now, and this is I'm saying it. This will probably change before things tip off on Thursday. Right now. Thanks, Jerod. Thanks. So right now, I'm just going to give you my Sweet 16 matchups and how they move into the Final Four. I've got Kansas against Maryland in the Sweet 16 with Kansas winning. I've got Arizona and Villanova, and I've got Arizona winning. So I've got Kansas and Arizona in the Elite Eight out of the South, and I've got Kansas going to the Final Four. I've got Cincinnati taking out Oregon. That's my big upset. And I have Cincinnati losing to Baylor in the Sweet 16. I have Oklahoma beating Texas. So I have Baylor and Oklahoma in the Elite Eight and have Oklahoma going to the Final Four. Then in the other side, I have Virginia and Purdue and Utah and Michigan State. And then Michigan State and Virginia facing off in the Elite Eight, Michigan State winning. In the Final Four, I've got it Kansas over Oklahoma in a replay of one of the great regular season games in college basketball history. I've got Kansas winning that. Michigan State knocking off North Carolina. Oh, I didn't do the North Carolina one bracket, but whatever. I've got North Carolina in the Final Four. Michigan State beating North Carolina, and I've got Michigan State winning the entire thing over Kansas.
Very nice. Ed, what about you? Final Four.
Yeah, so let's start in the West. I guess I should have ranted about Oregon being a 1 seed. This is a clear travesty of the RPI, where they're second, and I don't think they're anywhere near the second team. I've gotten some flack for that on Twitter, but I think that's the region where I have Oklahoma as the highest chance of getting out of there, and that's a team with flaws. It's a team that shoots a lot of threes, high variance team. So if we're going to see a sleeper final, I mean, if you press me to it, I'll take Oklahoma, but that's a team where we could see a weird team come out of there. And weird maybe this year means Duke, with the way college basketball things are going. I think Kansas has a pretty nice region, relatively, so I'll take them out of there. North Carolina out of the other region. And then, toss a coin with Michigan State and Virginia down in that region.
Okay, Andy, feel free to rebut Ed's thoughts on Oregon. Although you had them as a number one, that's just because you thought the committee was going to pick them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you believe they were a number one seed.
I do actually. Well, it's funny because I noticed this in looking through Ed's projections today that definitely compared to the RPI, which the Pac-12 as a whole, really got together and gamed that pretty well, which is not really I don't mean that as a negative. I mean, anyone could do that. I kind of look at this a little bit, and I'll just touch on this briefly, and then I'll get back into it. But when you look Big Ten compared to Pac-12, I mean, what you really want to do with the RPI is you just don't want to schedule the worst of the worst. Now, unfortunately for Big Ten teams, two of the worst are actually in the league this year because Minnesota and Rutgers are both outside of the top 250 in the RPI. So they obviously drug that down. But just from a scheduling standpoint, on average per team, Pac-12 teams scheduled about 3 games against sub-250 teams and about 1 against sub-300 teams. In Big Ten play, so if you take out Minnesota and Rutgers with the thought that you can't help but play those teams, unfortunately, the Big Ten was still at sub-250 teams per team was about 3.5, so not a huge difference, but sub-300 teams was over 2, so it was double what the Pac-12 was. So if you start looking at, you're really exaggerating those issues that were brought up earlier about, the Rutgers and the Minnesotas are kind of sucking everyone down, but you're exaggerating even more by a poor schedule. So the Pac-12 kind of, I don't know whether they had somebody come in and kind of consult on that or just did some of the things, some of the conferences have done from a football perspective, just kind of said we're not going to, schedule in some of these ways. So as a result, they ended up with a lot of teams with high RPIs. I think 11 of the 12 were in the top 102. I think UCLA was the 11th, and they were just outside the top 100. So for a committee that clearly valued top 50, top 100 wins, they pretty much had every time they went out in conference play, had 16, 15, 16 shots at getting, wins that this committee valued. That being said, I have not filled out a bracket yet, so I'm kind of winging it here. I do really like Oregon. They can play some small ball and spread guys out. I think they're a really good team. So I'm going to take them out of there. I think I would take Oklahoma, but I think the reliance on the three-point shot is a question mark for me with them. In the South, I definitely have Kansas. I think Miami's maybe a potential sleeper there. I like their team, but they have some, Angel Rodriguez is a little erratic at guard, so I'll take Kansas. In the Midwest, I'll take Michigan State. I hope we get another rematch of that Michigan State-Virginia game because I think it would be really good. Virginia lost quite a bit and still has managed to play really well. They've just got that distinctive style, but a Denzel Valentine-Malcolm Brogdon matchup would be pretty exciting. So I'll take Michigan State in that. And then out of the East, I don't know. I'm going to say North Carolina. The whole top half of that is pretty screwy with everybody that's there, but I'll let Ed's recent comments about Roy Williams maybe push me over the edge to take them. I do like Xavier more than a lot of people just because I think they've got depth, but some of the matchups on the bottom side of that bracket with the guards that are down there and the way they've struggled to contain guards as they did these last couple times they played Seton Hall concern me a little bit with them.
So we'll talk upsets here in a minute. I'll give my Final Four real quick. I have Kansas and Miami playing in the South, and I think Kansas will make the Final Four. I've got Oregon against Texas A&M in the Elite Eight, and I'm telling you, don't sleep on Texas A&M. That's a really balanced team. They played really well against Kentucky. They got big guys. They can shoot it. They play good defense. That's a really good balanced team.
You're just
what? Shut up! You're
just sucking up to your life, Morris.
No, Andy, back me up. Texas A&M's pretty good.
I definitely am tempted to put them in the Elite Eight. Their guards shooting is the only thing that concerns me. Daniel House is really good, but the other guys are, Anthony Collins is a question mark shooting the basketball. But they do have a good team, and they play really tough. I think that matchup with Texas, if Texas can get by Northern Iowa, would be a pretty good one in the second round.
Yeah, well, and as Ed just said, that is the region where a weird team could come out. So I'm picking the 3 seed there. In the Midwest, my Elite Eight game in the Midwest is actually a rematch of the Big Ten title game between Michigan State and Purdue, because I think Purdue's going to play Virginia, and I actually think Purdue can beat Virginia. And so I think Michigan State will obviously beat Purdue when they play. And then my Elite Eight game in the East is Indiana versus Xavier, and there's no way Yogi's losing to Trevon Blewett, so I think Indiana wins that game. Which would set up then a matchup between Indiana and Michigan State. And as much as I want to pick the Hoosiers, I can't pick the Hoosiers to beat Michigan State after seeing what they did once this year. So, and plus, I just think Michigan State's the best team in the country, so they're my pick for the national championship game. But I do pick the Hoosiers to make it to Houston. All right. So real quick, any interesting upsets that you guys have in the first round? Any high seeds that you have springing a big upset? Ryan, any jump out at you?
Well, our boy, friend of the show, Mark Titus, was on ESPN yesterday, and he said that his favorite one was UNC Wilmington over Duke, and so I'm going to go with that. If I do wind up picking an upset, that's going to be my big one. I also have this is second round, so we don't even know if this is going to happen, but I have Cincinnati taking out Oregon, who I think Oregon's a good team. I just think Cincinnati's a very tough team, and I think that if Oregon tries to go small on them, that it won't work, and Cincinnati's just going to work them repeatedly, in a physical manner. But as far as Duke, somebody brought this up today. I was watching, and I don't even remember who it was, but they were saying, look, those kids on UNC Wilmington, they all grew up, most of them grew up in the area wanting to play at Duke or UNC, and now they finally get the chance to play Duke. They don't ever get to play them, and this is finally they get the chance to play Duke, so they're going to have so much motivation there. I think Duke has lost 4 of 7. Without a Miles Jefferson, their defense is atrocious. It's Indiana at December bad, and so I think that you're going to see Duke fall early, and that's my pick for when they're going to fall.
Interesting. I actually have the other upset on that little part of the bracket. I have Yale beating Baylor. Part of that is influenced by the fact that I just can't stand Baylor, never have been able to since the Hunter Perea recruitment. But I like Yale there, and I almost picked Wilmington over Duke too. Now I may have to rethink that. Ed, what upsets stand out to you in the first round?
Yeah, mine's a little boring. I mean, I think Oregon State is overrated and overseeded as a 7. So VCU there. I get a little more interesting with the 11 seed. Gonzaga is a pretty good team. They were on the bubble for a while, where they really shouldn't have been. They really should not have been. And I think there is a lot of expectations on Seton Hall with just the way they played in the Big East tournament. I mean, they obliterated Xavier, and they played really well, but I think that was something that is above probably their level, and they're going to be a little overrated. So that might be a good, not something that has more than half chance of happening, but that might be a good upset because, people are going to pick Seton Hall based on what they saw in that tournament.
Very nice. And Andy, what about you? You've studied these teams extensively, so who do you think can come spring the upset?
This is the part where it comes out that I'm really not very good at picking the actual winners because of bracketology, because you can talk yourself into or out of pretty much anybody. So probably the shrewd move here is to go against any of these. But I think Hawaii and Cal is an interesting game. Hawaii's got some really good guards. And can score. Cal is really young. They're really talented, but also really young. And so I think Hawaii's an interesting team there. They've played well. Got a decent amount of travel even to get to Spokane from there, but that'll be an interesting one. I think the UNC Wilmington is interesting as well. They really press, play a lot of guys. Duke doesn't have a ton of depth, so I could see that one playing out. Like Ed, I think VCU. I thought Oregon State was overseeded, not just because that was one of the ones I missed by more than one seed line. So that was one. I really wanted to pick Stephen F. Austin, and that was a team that really scared me for IU to see in the tournament. But they play a team who in West Virginia who plays a lot like they do, so I wouldn't be stunned to see them pull the upset. But I don't think it's a great matchup for them to do it. And the other potential one for me is Iona over Iowa State in a game that might blow up the scoreboard. Nobody's going to play any defense in that one, and it could definitely be a game that gets up around the 100 mark. So that one should be really entertaining to watch. I think Iona could spring the upset. They got a couple good players there. So those are at least a few that I'm looking at.
Hey, speaking of Stephen F. Austin, they're the other upset pick that I have in my bracket. I love the fact that it's the two teams that are the best in the country at forcing turnovers playing each other. And that Stephen F. Austin team is good. What have they lost, like 11 games in the last 3 years? I mean, that is, obviously they don't have the same talent as West Virginia, but against a team that isn't great offensively, and Stephen F. Austin can really play some D, I like that one. I think that'll be a good potential upset. So who knows? I mean, you're throwing darts when you're picking upsets to a certain extent. But we'll see if any of those come out. Hopefully, some of those help you as you're filling out your brackets. All right, gentlemen. Well, let's go with some final thoughts here. This was a very, very quick hour, as the NCAA tournament preview show always is. And Ryan, we will go to you for your final thought. Last call first.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned it earlier. I think that the committee, didn't do any Indiana any favors with where they're picked and their seed and their path, but they did do them a big favor when it comes to playing with a chip on their shoulder. Clearly, the committee did not respect the fact that Indiana won the Big Ten title outright by 2 games, won 15 games in the conference. They, did not see this as a team that has really turned things around and is on the way up. They saw them as, a mid-level major conference team, and that's something that Indiana has to, come to grips with, understand, hey, people are doubting us, let's go prove them wrong. And this team has played very well when it has that mindset over the past few years. So it doesn't typically play well as a favorite, does okay as a favorite, unless apparently it's the second half at Illinois, which that was enjoyable. But no, I think that this team has got to come with the attitude that they don't respect us. They basically set it up so that one of the 3 blue blood programs in that section won't be making it to the Elite Eight, and Indiana's got to come with the attitude that, hey, guess what? We're just as good as these guys, and we're going to compete, and we're going to prove people wrong.
Love it. Ed, last call.
So I just want to remind everyone that it is dangerous to go against Jerod Morse in making predictions. On my first appearance on this podcast, he predicted Indiana to win the Big Ten this year. That happened. I picked Michigan State, which I don't feel terrible about. I picked Michigan 6th, which I would have been hung in Ann Arbor for thinking so low of this team, but I think I was all right on that. And then, if you guys have more of a commute that you need to burn up this week and you're interested in some analytics and some strategy for winning your pool, my book is an audio book is at winpoolbook.com.
And follow him at the Power Rank on Twitter.
At the Power Rank, yep. Lots of goodies there. You can get all my win probabilities round by round in an interactive visual.
Yeah, perfect. Mr. Bottoms, last call.
Well, to be fair, Ed, Jared's going to pick IU in pretty much any scenario, so I'm not really, we've
Ed
seen
doesn't need to know that.
That
Ed
was
doesn't
not,
need to know that.
That wasn't rare at all.
And the size of one, man, he's perfect. So
it was a great pick. Let's just leave it at that.
He does have a track record of making some really good predictions. I'm not gonna steer you wrong in that regard, like to a point of like predicting numbers of points and numbers of threes and things like that. So that cannot be taken away from him. But I just don't want
unfortunately,
you to feel
I
bad.
predicted Indiana's 5 seed too, so it's not like I'm always predicting positive things.
No, that's true. That's true. For me, the IU stuff is certainly exciting. Excited to see this team play, how they respond to the seeding and anything else. But I'm going to touch on something else that's cool and let you bring it home with any other IU stuff you have. So, as a handful of folks know, and I know Jerod and I both tweeted this out about this week. Brian, I'm going to try not to butcher his last name, Tonsoni, is one of the moderators in our chat after the games. His son is a manager on the IU team. And he started last year. He's a high school teacher and started a bracketology club. So he had reached out to me and some other folks that do bracketology and just kind of started asking some questions. Talked about wanting to try to do this and see how it would go. And so they did it last year just to kind of see how things would work out, how they would do. Didn't submit their picks to the bracket matrix, so I don't really know how they did in talking to him today. But anyway, so this year they went through their first round. They're at Delphi High School. Close to the Lafayette area, and the Lafayette paper ran a story about their bracketology club last week that I thought was really interesting. And so, they ran through their process, they submitted their picks, and as it turned out, they beat every damn one of us who's been doing this. And a really cool thing for them, they got, I think, maybe the highest score that anybody's ever gotten on the bracket matrix. If not, it's very close. Outscored first out of, I think, 144 entrants this year, and really did a good job. And so just want to kind of give Brian and the team there at the Delphi Bracketology folks some kudos for a job well done. And as I told him today, I said I'm going to start coming to them for questions instead of the other way around. But just a cool story. Another thing that shows that us Hoosiers really know our hoops from every this way and that. And so congrats to Brian and all the guys on that. Definitely a really cool story, and hopefully more comes out about that in the coming weeks. But definitely was a lot of fun. I tweeted a couple things out about it over the course of the day. So definitely encourage everybody to check that out. Find those guys on Twitter and give them big congratulations because they certainly deserve it.
Yeah, no, a huge job to Delphi Bracketology, but we're not going to be able to tweet your team picture anymore if you don't get that guy with a Purdue shirt out of the front row. Come on, get someone with an Indiana shirt up there.
Yeah, or at least black that out or something, blur it. Right. We can't. That's a good point. That's an excellent point.
We can't have that anymore. Can't have it. Congrats to those guys. It's a phenomenal story, and Brian has been such a huge part of what we've been building here at the Assembly Call, helping us build the community, moderate the chat, and so we're so excited to see that happen for him because he is an awesome guy. So very, very cool. All right, well, for my final thought, look, when Indiana won the outright Big Ten title at Iowa and then came back and had their victory lap against Maryland, win 80-62, and it's this great day, and the senior speeches are wonderful, and there's so much hope for the Big Ten tournament. And then Indiana sputters out of the gate in the Big Ten tournament, and Michigan wins, and you could feel some of the uneasiness start to come back. And I'm not saying it was totally unwarranted, because this is a team that hasn't always performed up to expectations in the Big Ten tournament, certainly, and even in the NCAA tournament. And I know that Indiana fans are excited about this team's potential and understand that this is an outright Big Ten championship team, but I can't help feeling some of that uneasiness. And so for my last comment, I just want to say and stress as much as I can, embrace this. This is a really good team. I mean, this is, again, the outright Big Ten champions by 2 games. They've got a senior point guard who is an all-time legend at the school, a center who in the future is going to be a first-round draft pick, several other guys that may play in the NBA, a bunch of supporting characters, parts that really fit well together, a coach that has really seemed to mature and improve and adjust. And I know that some of Tom Crean's teams haven't succeeded all that well in the NCAA tournament, but look, a lot of Tom Crean's teams haven't succeeded in February, and they did this year. A lot of Tom Crean's teams haven't been able to change their style of play and turn a weakness into a strength mid-season. This team was really able to do that in a number of ways. And so I know that historical precedent and that there are reasons to be pessimistic and to feel uneasy and to wonder if this Indiana team can really do what we hope they can do in the NCAA tournament. Try as much as you can to put those to the side, embrace this team, get excited, because I really think Indiana's going to play a great game against Chattanooga. I will be really surprised if we come on here on the postgame show and we're not really positive about how Indiana played. And if that happens, Indiana should win that game by 10 or 15 points. That's just my gut feeling on what we'll see. And then everybody will get that matchup that we want, and we'll see what happens from there. I think it's a great opportunity for Indiana. I have no fear about playing Kentucky. They're a great team. We're a great team. Let's lace them up. Let's duel, and let's see who is worthy of going on to the Sweet 16. But get behind this team. Try as much as you can to not be uneasy, because to a certain extent that can get in the way of you really enjoying what could be a great run. We don't know how much longer we'll have this team to watch, to appreciate, to enjoy, but it's been a great ride with them so far this season. So embrace them, enjoy every last second that we have them for the rest of this season. Hopefully it's 6 more games. We'll see. It all starts Thursday night, and as soon as that game is over, we will be here with another live episode of the Assembly Call. We may go a little bit shorter than normal because obviously the Kentucky game will be on after that. And if you can't watch live because you want to watch the Kentucky game, we understand. Obviously, you can listen to the podcast later. The tournament always changes up the normal rhythm of things. But we'll be here talking about an IU victory, hopefully, and then hopefully looking ahead to a big game in the round of 32. But until then, stay excited. Do what you can to pass the time. Fill out your brackets, and make sure that you go to assemblycall.com/bracket and join us in our bracket challenge. And with that, we will talk to you Thursday. Have a great night and a great week, everybody.